Big Buck Registries, Big Buck Podcast, episode number 71, Deer P202, Making Sense of Deer Sense, with Dean Vanier. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hey, this is Pat Howard, Covert Scouting Cameras, Wildlife Surveillance Specialist. And you're listening to my number one favorite podcast, Jay and Dusty, on the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Hi, this is Dennis Fink from Ozonics, one of the partners. You're listening to my favorite hunting podcast on iTunes, the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Hey, this is Dr. Carl Miller, and you're listening to my favorite hunting podcast on the internet, the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Welcome to another show. This is your host, Jay Scott from the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast. Thank you for joining me and my co-host over there in Ohio, Dusty Phillips. Dusty, what's happening?
Hey. I tell you what's happening. The rut is just around the corner. That's what's happening.
Rut check.
This is happening.
You don't do that in the woods, do you?
No.
It was pretty good, though. I mean, it's close.
Yeah, I definitely do not do that in the woods.
I've been practicing my snort wheeze in the woods, and nothing's happening.
You know that's supposed to come out your mouth, not your hind, right?
Oh. I didn't get the diagram. Oh, well. Hey, I got a couple of shout-outs I want to give out to some people that have shown some higher levels of dedicated listenership to the Big Buck Registry, Big Buck Podcast, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
All right. First and foremost, Bill Lawrence, who is the fellow that I bumped into out at the Kittery Trading Post Day. And Bill pulled me out of line and recognized my shirt, and we had a great chat. We've been buddies on Facebook ever since, and we've interacted a little bit. And Bill's actually shared some tips with me, and I've shared some tips with him. So it's actually worked out pretty good. And he's a frequent listener. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Charles Byrum, who has interacted fluently and always gives us a good review, and not just a review, but a good, thorough review on Facebook every time a show comes out. Kind of lets us know what's going on and what he thought about it. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for tuning in with us.
Very cool. Got any shout-outs today, Dusty?
I'm going to shout out to James Snow at the Euro Hanger.
The Euro Hanger. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, it's the facebook.com/Euro Hanger. That's EUROHANGER. It's a skull mount hanger.
It is very cool. You sent me one of those, and I think it's one of the most ingenious little devices I've ever seen. It's so basic, and it's one of those things like, why didn't I think of that? But he thought of it, and he's patented it, and it's great for a skull mount. So
yeah, absolutely. Cool. Yeah, it's I've got two of them in my podcast studio, and they're awesome looking. You can't even tell they're hanging on anything.
That's awesome. Yeah, they're very, very cool. It's just hides all that hanging stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Did I hear you say that the muzzleloader opens in New Hampshire today?
Yep, opens today.
No kidding.
November 1st, muzzleloader. Good luck to everybody in New Hampshire that's taking out the smoke pole today. And I got one more shout out, and this is kind of in line with guns. I got a nice news article, or I guess it's technically a flyer from the New Hampshire Firearms Coalition, Live Free or Die. That's our slogan here in New Hampshire. And it's a 2014 election guide, and it tells you who to vote for and who not to vote for based off of a ranking system and a grade system like A through F, like we got in school, on how they see gun ownership.
Really?
And it's anywhere from the U.S. Senate to governor, the representatives in Congress, executive counselors, state reps, state senate, all the way down through every single district in New Hampshire from the top to the bottom. And it ranks every single person, gives them a grade on whether they're pro-gun or not.
Really? That's interesting.
Which is pretty much how I vote anyway.
Yeah, guns are important.
And now I've got my guide. So thank you to the New Hampshire Firearms Coalition.
Absolutely.
So the rut is kind of getting busy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely starting to see some activity here in Ohio, and I think our guest today is going to put the icing on the cake for us when it comes to the rut and what to do with your urines.
No question about it. I mean, you go into the store every fall and you look on the shelf of scents, and it's just this aisle full of everything you could think of. And there's no way you can know what everything does, when to use it, how to use it. And believe it or not, there are methods and strategies on how to use all this stuff. It's not just dump a bunch out and hope something happens. There's a strategy behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a ton of different urines on the shelf at your sporting goods store. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. How many do you think you would count if you went to one of the major retailers?
Oh, I'm guessing 30.
I'd say at least 30. I was at a Bass Pro today, and I bet there were 30 plus. Easy.
Unbelievable.
It was crazy. So we asked our good friend, Dean Vanier from Northwoods Common Sense, who I'm a fan of, by the way.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
To come back onto the show, because he's been on before, and kind of do a second class, so to speak. We kind of did Common Sense for 101. This is like the advanced course, Deer Sense 202.
What better time than the rut kicking off?
Absolutely. This is exactly the right time. And instead of trying to sort through all that stuff that you get at the other stores, Dean kind of cleans it up and gives us, and you could apply it to other stuff too, but I do like Dean's stuff overall. But he's going to tell us how to use all those different scent categories. And when I say categories, I mean, if you look at every single label, there's Doe. There's Doe and Heat. There's Buck. There's Buck with Tarsal. There's, I don't even know what else is out there.
They're starting to come out with some kind of scrape stuff. And
Scrape stuff.
There's all kinds of stuff. Rub gel. And it's crazy what's happening with all this.
Gels. There's, the stuff you want to put on your boost. There's the stuff you want to put on the trees. There's the stuff that, grapefruit additives. I'm sure there's something out there, or beet juice. There's got to be all kind of stuff like that. I'm making stuff up now, but that's my point, is that there's 8 million things to pick from, and you really don't know what's what, and nor would you thought that you were missing something, because it's just there and you just buy it and use it, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's one of them things where you can really get a whole bag full of different things to use while you're in the woods.
Yep. Well, we asked Dean to come back and break it down even further. So if you'd like to tune in to this, or actually tune in to a Common Sense 101, it's, I'm looking it up. If you'd like to tune in to Common Sense 101, that was episode 18. That's
been a long time ago.
That was a long time ago. It is exactly 1 year and 3 days to the date that we had Dean on before, and he cleaned up a lot of that myths and strategies, questions that we had back then for the basic stuff. This is the advanced accelerated course, so you might want to strap yourself in, because we're going to get going on this stuff.
Absolutely. Let's call Dean up.
Let's get Dean now. Mr. Dean Vanier, welcome back to the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on there, Jay and Dusty. It's good to be back with you guys.
Dude, we're psyched to have you back.
Absolutely.
You're the man. You are Dr. Dopey, as far as I'm concerned.
I've been called worse, but that's one of my preferential traits.
I'm going with Dr. Buck Torso P.
Okay.
That or Dino's Deer in a Bottle. That doesn't sound too bad either.
It's awesome. Dean, we hooked up down at the Fish and Game Expo not too long ago, and we didn't get a chance to talk too much because we were out manning our booths, and I was doing some interviews. But you did come over and talk to us, and that show's still going to air in the future. But it was always good to see a good friend from way back, and by way back, I mean you're one of our early guests on this show, and thanks for coming back and doing round 2 of the scents that we use as hunters. And let's go a little deeper tonight if we could. I want to get into the deeper elements of what scents are out there, what's in your bottle, when should we use these things, what glands are they representing, and let's get in some real detailed specifics about this stuff tonight.
Well, I'm going to back up just a little bit here.
Perfect.
and Northwoods Common Sense, just for a few of our listeners out there, if they haven't heard of us, it's called Northwoods Common Sense, and we've been in business for well over 25 years now, and our claim to fame is our products are 100% pure, unnatural. They're hand-poured, hand-labeled. It's a mom-and-pop shop scenario, but we haven't changed anything, including the label, for that period of time. And now moving forward, we carry those 4 products: Doe, Buck with Tarsal, and Doe in Heat. We've got some great footage that we've been getting, and where we last left off was we were covering the pre-rut, the peak rut, and the post-rut, where we utilized these 4 different products. As the testosterone rose in the bucks and the does, their estrogen levels rose. We started changing gradually, if you remember, that doe and that buck urine by adding an eyedropper of buck with Tarsal to the buck urine, and a little bit of Doe in Heat to the doe urine. So we're basically mimicking what Mother Nature designed the actual progression of the rut to be. So having said that, I think it's important that everybody understands that the white-tailed deer communicates through scents in their scrapes, in their licking branches, and this identifies who they are, and they mark these scrapes / licking branches with everything from their preorbital, metatarsal gland, saliva, and tarsal gland. So you can pick anywhere you want to start, either one of you, and I'll try to answer those questions the best that I can.
All right, I'm confused already, but Dusty, where do you want to start?
Yeah, I want to start with the actual. We're coming into the pre-rut, and we're thinking about putting out a mock scrape. We're wanting to kick off a scrape and within 20, 30 yards of our tree stand on generally what I would say is a pretty common traveled route for the bucks to go down. Where do we need to start?
Well, where we want to particularly focus on is mostly the licking branch initially, because without a licking branch there, the scrape will never appear, or even if you put one there, it might get visited once by a buck, but he certainly won't return and continue to mark that scrape. So we need to have that branch approximately 4 to 5 feet off the ground. It could be even a little bit higher. I've seen whitetails stand right up on their hind legs. And what we want is to have that spot to be, as you said, as palatable as possible. The deer want to be there in that particular area. So it's a well-traveled route. That licking branch, what I'll typically do, and you can do this any time of year. We have pictures of bucks in velvet in scrapes, mock scrapes, in August and sooner. So again, it's not as far as for breeding purposes as much as it is for curiosity and communicating with other deer. So basically what we'll do is we'll chop up that branch at the end, usually about the size of a pencil, a little bit smaller. And if you take a couple rocks and grind that end of that branch up so it's almost like a toothbrush. And when you get in, you could go even more advanced, and there's different gland lures that you can get from trappers, everything from preorbital gland to interdigital gland, the preorbital gland being the gland up by the eyes of the whitetail, and the interdigital gland being between the digits of the hooves, which at that point they'll drive their hooves into the ground and make that scrape. We've had probably this year in a couple different scrapes upwards of 3 to 5 different bucks visiting these scrapes that we have put in. Probably, I think, Dusty, you're going to be bow hunting this stand, is that correct?
Correct.
So the biggest feature of that stand should be upwind from your stand, and you'll be back on the inside. If you can understand what I'm trying to say here, if that buck comes in 50 yards downwind, and that scent is, or that scrape, that mock scrape is upwind from your stand, you'll get a better chance of getting them closer to you.
Right, you're gonna want him to smell that.
Oh, absolutely, and I'm just doing a little bit more research on that because it's huge, beating the whitetail's defense mechanisms by basically communicating with these animals is critical. You're using that. They can smell a doe in heat at 400 yards, which means they could smell you or I from that same distance. So utilizing that defense mechanism, that being their sense of smell, to your advantage is huge. You can imagine the territory you could cover, whether it's a swamp, an oak ridge, or in your case, a wide, huge pasture, and he comes into the horns and locks up at 500 or 600 yards, or 5, and he could probably still smell that doe in heat or whatever deer lure you're using.
Right. That's interesting that you say that they can smell 400 yards.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, that's why they're, I think, the most sought after big game animal in the United States. The other thing that fascinates me is you're utilizing their ears, their eyes, and their nose. And of course, these grunt calls, if a deer is circling around, that's another tool that you can utilize. But the scrape is probably the most important part of your setup. If you look at it as setting a trap to catch a coyote, you'd use coyote urine. In this case, we're using different deer lures. A lot of times we've had, particularly this year, Shelley had a nice buck come back on her tracks. She had buck urine on her boots. And just, again, it's a curiosity scent. And although the testosterone is starting to increase, so they're going to become quite a bit more aggressive here in the next couple of weeks.
Right, absolutely. It's one of the things where a lot of people don't utilize the buck urine. It could bring a particular buck that you may have never seen before from another farm over to visit your particular scrape, and make him earn frequent flyer miles right there at your hunting setup.
Yeah, someone just sent me a picture. He said it's not in your best interest to have your picture taken sometimes, and then the next picture is him with his 8-pointer. So that he never even had seen, and that is what you're doing. As soon as I'm not sure if we mentioned it before, but if you've got 3 bucks on that 30 or to even 50 acres. And these animals all know who each other are by sight, by smell, whether it's through licking branches, whether it's through hooking trees, tracks. And as soon as you insert another buck into that bachelor group, everybody else wants to know who that guy is. It's probably the most underrated deer lure out there, and it's probably one of our most popular. Especially with the bow hunters. And of course, I use it right straight through right now. Our scrapes, we're getting ready to, with this warm weather, we're getting ready to do our dripper bags in fairly remote areas. And some of these scent dispersed units will last up to 2, maybe even close to 3 weeks sometimes now. So you can really set a deer up if you've got a good one, on camera, and you've got a pretty good idea. And even if you don't, you're going to draw deer from a long ways away, Dusty. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm going to testify to making a mock scrape and just dumping a little bit of Northwoods Common Sense buck with torso, just a drop in there, and the next morning I shot a buck over it. I mean, that's phenomenal. The curiosity of that buck that I shot. It wasn't no monster 8-point. It was a call buck, but the fact of the matter is that buck come in the next morning after the night before I made the mock scrape at about 25 yards. He come in to see if that particular buck had been back that morning.
Yeah, sometimes they'll lay down, 50 yards downwind. Hey, did I ever send you one of those Northwood scent holsters?
Yes, sir.
All right, because those things work great for your scrapes. That'll make it last a lot longer, and it allows you to kind of manipulate what products to use. It's kind of interesting. I was up on an Oak Ridge a couple weeks ago, and I had put my mock scrape in it. And you know what I think really got them really curious is when I cut a stick, and I was almost using it like a golf club, clearing out the leaves from underneath this licking branch. And, of course, I sprayed in my Doe urine and my buck urine. And I got right in my tree stand, and 20 minutes later, 2 buck come in. And I've seen it happen probably a half a dozen times that fast. but I almost think that they thought that was another deer making that scrape, just from the sound of the leaves and the pawing and this kind of stuff. And of course, I shot one of them, and he's in the freezer. So it's a fun way to hunt. You end up seeing a lot of different things that you haven't experienced before.
Right. So break it down a little bit. We make our mock scrape. We rig up our licking branch. To start off with, we need to start with just a plain buck urine.
That's correct. And as what we're talking about right now, as we're right at the end of October, right now we're starting to add our tarsal gland, like an eyedropper of the tarsal gland to the buck urine, and an eyedropper of Doe and heat to the Doe urine. Now, if we're using our dripper bags, I'm going completely right now with buck with tarsal, because we do have rack buck pushing each other around. And they're urinating down their tarsal glands in our mock scrapes. It's just a matter of timing now. And in another dripper bag, we could use Doe and heat. So if on our particular spot, we've got 200 yards of some pasture. On one side, I could put a scrape with Doe and heat in it. The other one, I'll put buck with tarsal in the dripper bag. And you can doctor them up as you go. So that gives you two reasons for that deer to come back. Number one is his girlfriend is there. Number two, the competition is there as well. So there's two reasons to come back and visit that scrape.
Right, and I'm going to say that his girlfriend's got a broadhead.
Yeah, definitely. Now, that licking branch, a lot of folks might say, what kind of a tree should I use? In most cases, up our way, what we're doing, I think, Jay, we're seeing a lot of them underneath beech trees and hemlocks. Is that what you're kind of seeing?
Yeah, exactly. Today we had one actually not far from the house doing that licking branch thing. It was just, I don't even know what kind of tree it was, just kind of this rogue tree.
But those tend to be the most common ones. And to have that, to make sure that branch is chewed up enough, whether you do it with a couple rocks or a pair of pliers or something like this, again, this time of year, you really want to try to be using rubber gloves, being as scent-free as you possibly can. Because with a nose like that, they're going to pick that up, and obviously that's just not going to go real well unless you get a good rainstorm and it clears it up. Now, if that licking branch is too high, that 4 or that 5 feet, there's a couple things you can do. You can either cut a limb off another tree and tie it on to that branch, bringing it down to that level, a higher branch, so that it can be utilized for a licking branch. Or you can take some parachute cord, is what I usually do, and I'll take a higher branch and I'll tie it off, and I'll tie it to the base of the tree, which brings that branch down to where you want it. Because they'll just if they break off that licking branch with their antlers, they're not going to come back. And that's from what we've seen from our cameras in the last 25 years of doing this stuff.
Gotcha. Interesting. So you actually build your own sometimes?
Absolutely. There's it's the same thing as they're basically calling cards. You have your scrapes and you have your licking branches, and you have your natural scrapes and your natural licking branches, and then you have your unnatural or your mock scrapes or mock licking branches. A lot of times we'll put our licking branches in April and May. And we'll even, clean up the ground, move any rocks and stuff like that, so that scrape is inviting to a deer to use it that upcoming fall. I call it preparation for the opportunity. Preparation being your scouting for the opportunity, which is deer season, and I keep breaking it down and utilizing each one of those those scouting information and applying to that pre, peak, and post rut. I look at it as 3 small different hunting seasons, and I hunt those 3 seasons accordingly.
Gotcha. Dean, could you, and I just wanted to kind of go back to our first episode that we did with you, which is almost a year ago to the day. It was October 26, 2013. It was episode 18, which was almost 50 episodes ago. And
wow,
which would make sense. It's about almost a year ago, 52 weeks. But we learned a ton in that show, and we're already going deeper today than we did then. And I've already learned a ton in the very few minutes we've been talking. But I was wondering if you could, and if you want to go back and listen to that show, by the way, if you're listening right now, it's episode 18 on the Big Buck Registries Big Buck podcast, and that can found on iTunes. What I'd like you to do, Dean, if you could, is I want to bring this down to a personal level. I want you to walk me through how you prepare with your scents that you have, and walk us through like a success kill that you've had recently.
Okay. Well, probably, and this is a technique that I use quite a bit, especially this time a year. In this particular case, I was hunting probably a good 1.5 miles, 2 miles in, and I found a couple hookings that were very new, and trying to pick the right story here. And I knew the buck was pretty good because the tree was probably around the size of a soda bottle, something like that. It hadn't been there probably for maybe 2 or 3 days. And in this particular case, I opened up a scrape right beside it. And my philosophy was this buck was traveling this particular route, and it was a good-sized chunk of woods, probably 1,500 acres, maybe a little bit more. So he could go pretty much anywhere he wanted. And I had no idea who he was, how big he was. But as soon as I found that hooking, I opened up a mock scrape, and I hit it right away. And this was, I think it was probably middle November. And what I had done is I put this mock scrape in, tied this licking branch down, and I took a couple rocks and I crushed exactly what I said I did. And sometimes it just happens. It happens so fast. Well, what had happened was this deer came in, and I had set up on the ground probably 35 yards away, and it was the only way I could set up. And this particular animal came in twice, and I couldn't get on him the first time. And he came in, and he was like looking behind the tree, and he could definitely smell something. He was just a little concerned. I don't know if he picked up a little smell from my rubber boots or whatever, but he didn't come in. And so he took off, and I let him go. I didn't get a good shot anyway. So when I left that night, I hit that scrape again. Well, I came in next morning, and a lot of times if you set these scrapes up, and I think I mentioned it to Dusty, I'm sure he's experienced it, a lot of these deer will come in, and they'll hit that scrape, and they'll lay down 50 yards downwind from that. And sure enough, I came back that next morning, and I had set up, and got right back to where I was. And sure enough, he came right in. And again, it was very fast because I think he thought that I was another deer, because I was making a little bit of noise, as you do, walking through the woods in the middle of nowhere, and got to that scrape, sprayed it down, and got about 35, 40 yards away, and I knocked him down. It was a nice 8-pointer and real white tines, 3.5-year-old. But that's happened so many times. It's the same thing has happened in a cedar swamp in northern Vermont. I walk in, and a lot of times these techniques work great if you've never hunted that area. You can walk right in, and as soon as you've identified where there's a buck, as soon as you insert a virtual whitetail, and that virtual whitetail being your deer lures, if you're applying the right stuff at the right time, it's absolutely deadly. And this deer, on this deer, I had run a drag rag through, I think it was 3 different scrapes, and this was during the peak of the rut. And I'm sure the scrapes were being used by several different buck. But again, no camera. I found these 3 scrapes probably within 100 yards of each other, and started from one end, and I went right straight through every single one with that drag rag, and I sprayed Doe and heat in them, and got to my stand location and set up. And my philosophy was that 100 yards has a lot of wind. You're covering a lot of ground on that 100-yard stretch. And if you multiply that times 400 yards over that 100 yards, you're covering a huge amount of area. And again, we're using that whitetail's nose to our advantage. And in that case, again, he came in like a rocket, nose to the ground. And as Dusty said, he's in my freezer now. So
Gotcha. I want to kind of go through that scenario a little bit more in detail.
Sure.
So you found some fresh scrapes.
Sure, yeah.
Spread out over 100 yards or so.
Exactly.
And you applied Doe and Heat, your own product, and you did a drag rag that. Did you reapply as you kind of traveled the 100 yards, or did you just?
Usually, what I'll do in this particular case, and again, we weren't in freezing weather. We haven't had a lot of snow, so this is a great technique to utilize. What I do is I'll have that plastic bag with my drag rag in it, and of course I have my scent holster on my side. So as I'm dragging that rag through that scrape, I'll get to that scrape and I'll take the spray bottles, and again I'll hit it if I can. If I've got time, I'll hit it with both buck urine or buck with Tarsal and the Doe and Heat with the spray bottle, and I can touch up the drag rag a little bit. You can even push it into the dirt with a stick. The more you smell like a deer, the more you paint that picture that I am a white-tailed deer. The same thing if you're using a call. You're painting that picture to make that other deer believe that you're a real deer. And so at that point, I'll continue to that next scrape location. And again, you want to really try not to touch as little debris as you can. I know it's very difficult, but every bit of caution that you take, the more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. And I'll drag rag to that next scrape. In between, if that rag gets a little bit dry, I'll just reach right down. This is what makes that scent holster so easy to use. You reach right down. You don't have to open up anything. Spray that rag down, and you go to the next scrape. And I'll spray that down just a little bit. It sounds like you're using a lot of product, but you're really not, because those molecules for that sprayer are so fine, it doesn't take a whole lot. And then I continue on to that next scrape. And what that does is it sets a huge, huge scent line for those deer to pick up.
Okay.
Mornings are fantastic. You know, the bucks are on their feet. They're moving. They're looking for the girls. And what you're doing is, you know, I probably crossed over that 100 yards. I probably crossed at least a dozen different deer trails. So
you figured. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
So you figured that there was a buck bedded down somewhere within 50 to 75 yards of where this trail basically went. You didn't know which side necessarily, but you knew that if you loaded up your drag rag with your sprayer when you first started out with some Doe and Heat. Is that correct?
That's correct. Because we're talking about the rut right now.
Yep. In the middle of the rut, you ended up hitting the first scrape. You sprayed some buck Tarsal and some Doe and Heat in that scrape. And
that's correct.
Refreshened your drag rag, and then continued on to the next scrape, which is down the alleyway there a little ways.
Sure.
Did the same thing there, and then got to the last one. And over that time frame, you've squirted what, 5-10 times, maybe?
Oh, if that. I mean, it's. Oh, you mean for all three? Yes, probably 5 or 10 times. You're not even using maybe a quarter of an ounce of product at that point.
Okay.
Because remember, a lot of times the deer are using it themselves as well. That smell is already there. You're trying to mimic that a deer has just revisited that particular area.
Gotcha. Now, so you get to the last scrape. You're done. You sprayed that a little bit, and now you got to go set up in your stand. What direction is the wind blowing at this point from where you need to go?
Well, again, everybody, you could try to pick, and everybody's going to say, but the wind is swirling, and that's the key. The only way that, unless you're very familiar with the area, you can manipulate it very well, because you can actually set your stand up and ahead of time. This is kind of a cold call, what we're talking about, walking in on this for a day, finding a scrape line and doctoring it up. But you could actually do the same thing if you were familiar with the area, Jay. You could actually put 3 mock scrapes in that 100 yards as well.
Okay.
So you could hunt it 2 different ways. The first one is an area that you're not familiar with, and you find a scrape or a scrape line. You can utilize that to your advantage, or you can set them up. That preparation for the opportunity, you could actually put those 3 scrapes up and then manage the wind from that direction, because you're setting up with those 3 scrapes, let's say, on the outside of a swamp, and you know that wind is blowing into the swamp. That's a huge bonus. And if you're unfamiliar with the area, you're just going to have to watch downwind. With a rifle, you can obviously shoot as far as you can see. With a bow, it's a little bit more critical. I always say if you can get that scent upwind from your stand, if you had one in the center out 50 yards, one to your left 50 yards, and another one to your right 50 yards, is probably one of the perfect scenarios. With the wind blowing either to your left, to your right, or just about anywhere at that point for rifle season.
Gotcha. So you want to kind of, depending upon how that wind direction changes in that area you're used to, then you want to kind of use the wind to your advantage.
Right.
So how far from the scrape? So you got one. Is it like a triangle type situation?
It could be.
Okay.
And again, this is what you're asking is a situation where the hunter is familiar with his location. I would say, or a half circle. You being on the flat end of the circle,
okay,
and you're sent in a half moon type shape.
Gotcha.
If you're in a tree stand 20 feet, sometimes they still pick you up. I know Dusty said they'll pick you up from 400 yards as far as they can see. But I would say like a half moon configuration.
Okay.
And what's going to happen is it's kind of like trolling for lake trout, if you will. You're setting that lure out there, and you want it to cover as much, as far as fishing, cover as much water as you can trolling. Here you're trying to cover as much air volume, as much territory as you can, because they have one goal, and that goal is to find a doe and breed. And the only way to find that doe is through scent. And the only way to tell if she's ready to stand is to scent check her urine. And hunters don't break it down to that extent. They say, I want a bottle of deer lure. Well, what are you getting? Why, how do I apply it, and that kind of stuff. And that's what we're trying to answer, I think.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's all during the rut.
That's correct.
Okay.
And actually, we're setting up these. The last story was the rut, but most of these scrapes and these licking branches are being utilized all the way through the pre-rut, and until they start to identify who's going to be the dominant buck. We've got some fantastic footage of a 4-pointer in a scrape, and he looks up and he runs away. Here comes the Big 10, pushes him out, and that buck urinates in the scrape and leaves. Well, the 4-pointer comes right back. And this happened, I think we've got probably 20 pictures of this little 4-pointer trying to mark this scrape, and this big guy won't let him do it. And it's really funny.
That's pretty
and
funny.
It's the picking order, he's not going to, and then following that, we'll have 5 does come in and hit that scrape. And at that point, when we get pictures like this, we just leave it alone, because we've done our due diligence. The deer have basically taken over the scrape itself.
So is the goal to kind of seed that scrape to get it going, to get it hot, so that others will come in and start using it?
That's a great way to put it. And as long as I've been doing it, I've never heard that. I hope you don't mind me using that in my.
No, use it, definitely.
But that's a great point, because what you're doing is you're planting that seed in hopes that, well, hopefully you whack a buck right away.
Right.
But having said that, hopefully, and if not, if the deer take it over, then you've got a complete natural environment that you created. You started the whole process. And you'll get more deer using it. And of course, as that pre-rut goes to the peak rut, where the testosterone gets right to the point where they're not waiting, the bucks are making that scrape in anticipation of does coming to market, so that they can identify them if they're ready to stand or not.
Gotcha.
And so that's when that buck is waiting at that scrape. After that, after his testosterone reaches a certain level, he's going to take off. He's not going to stay in that particular 30-acre lot or 50-acre lot that he's been in all summer. He's going to go see the girls on your neighbor's farm or what have you. And that's when you start getting pictures of deer that you've never seen before, because they're coming out of the mountains, or they're coming from miles around, up to 7 or 8 miles a night. They could travel easy.
Right. If I find a fresh scrape or a scrape line,
Yeah.
Is it reasonable to expect that that buck that made that scrape is somewhere within 100-yard vicinity of me at that point, or a couple hundred yards?
It certainly is absolutely possible. In a couple cases, I have put scrapes right next to an existing scrape, and come back the next morning and have the place completely destroyed. So that deer was right there, very close. How close, you never can tell. Sometimes they'll watch you walk right by them. It's really hard to say, but if you have that existing scrape, there's another good technique. You can touch up his scrape, or more of a slap in the face is to put another one right beside it.
Right.
And
that's like throwing.
That gets a quick response.
That's like throwing gasoline on a fire when you do that.
Well, I could say it was kind of fun when I tried it a couple times, but that's a really good technique.
So describe that again, Dean. I want to make sure we got this one right, because so there's an existing scrape out there that's fairly fresh, and you make a new one right next to it.
Absolutely. Again, this is it's a tool. It's fun. You really never know what you're gonna get into, but the ultimate goal is to know what you're trying to accomplish, and that is to get another deer there during daylight hours so that you can get a crack at them.
Right.
And so what's going on through his body is he's designed to let other bucks know that he is either the dominant buck or he's ready to breed. And by making these scrapes, he's pushing other bucks out of there, hoping, as the scenario with that 10-point and that little 4-corn I was telling you about. His philosophy is that is his baby, and he's waiting for a doe to go mark that. So if you go in and put another scrape right beside it, what that's telling him is that there's another buck in the area that's challenging him. One that's not Mike, it's not Bob or Phil, because he knows who they are, but it's another buck that he can't identify. And by golly, he's going to probably try to get his point across, depending on how dominant he is. Or, again, it could be a smaller buck, We can't be picky trophy hunters out here in New England. I love my venison. But it could be a 4-corn, it could be a 6-pointer that's making that scrape, or even a spike for that matter. But typically your more dominant animals, whether it's a 4 over a spike or a 6 over a fork, 4-pointer, is going to probably dominate that other deer and probably kick him out of that scrape. So by applying another scrape, it threatens his stacking as far as breeding rights are concerned.
Gotcha. Okay. Very nice. Thank you for that, Dean. Dusty, where should we go from here?
Let's get into the peak rut.
Okay.
And what applications should we be doing to make that scrape something that a mature buck will want to come back and visit to, that we can mimic?
Okay, so now we're into the peak rut or the chase phase, where the bucks are actually chasing the girls. You can still stick with that same scrape technology or technique. Assuming that the bucks that you had initially set them up for during the pre-rut are probably not going to be there, but other bucks will be coming through. You can stick with that. But what happens is the weather's going to have a big impact on this, because if we're talking late November, mid to late November, Thanksgiving, during the peak of the rut, if you spike at above freezing temperatures at night and during the day, let's say mid-40s, you can get away with a dripper bag. And that allows you to actually, like, a good point being, like, if you were to put 2 or 3 dripper bags out right now, that should take you into the second week of November, providing that scent dispersal unit is working correctly. So you can anticipate that if it's going to freeze, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good. And, of course, your drag rag is going to be something, or even if you don't use a drag rag, you could still, because it's going to freeze, that scent holster stays warm next to your body, you could probably switch that up and hit that every 20 or 30 yards as you're walking to your stand. So the bucks are looking for the girls. If we have freezing temperatures, probably the best product or something that you could use is a heated scent dispersal unit. And if you stop and think about it on a cold day, or you get out of bed in the morning, you can't smell cold coffee, you can't smell cold pizza, and when you heat something up, those air molecules become real light and they'll travel a long ways. So we have a product called Little Hottie, which is a heated scent dispersal unit, which keeps scent warm to about 95 degrees or close to the body temperature of a live deer, which is really neat. And it functions on a hand warmer. So you can make your own makeshift one, and I'm not afraid to mention that because it's a great technique. I've used everything from a sock with a hand warmer in it and spray a little dough and heat on it, and it's not going to freeze. But our product is professionally built in the U.S., and it's a neat product. And I've shot some really nice deer with it. And it's not complicated. It's just that if they can smell it, I can smell hot coffee throughout the whole house when it's warm. And if a deer can smell 400 yards, he certainly can smell a hot doe or whatever product you happen to put out there. Or for that matter, he can smell a hunter. So you've got to change it up a little bit when it comes to the peak of the rut when you're using scent products. Calls, there's not going to be so much of a differential, although you could get away with using, and it's the same thing as scent, you can get away with using something like the low angry grunt, a tending grunt call, or if you really push the envelope and there's a good buck in the area, snort leads if you want to challenge them. A lot of this stuff works well with your scrapes and your scents, because again, the better you paint that picture for that deer to believe that there is or there was another deer there, the more you're going to increase your odds of success. So those are as far as the peak of the rut is concerned, we end up shooting a lot more deer in the pre-rut right up through probably the first week of November. Once the deer are out there running the hills, running the girls and stuff like that, it's a great time to hunt. There's a lot of activity. It's very exciting. But we're very blessed because usually we've done the majority of our damage before it gets to that stage.
My thing is on the doe and heat urine, you're driving to the woods, some people fortunate enough to be in their backyard, Jay.
Right.
But, I get into, I throw the doe and heat on the dashboard and your little spray dispenser.
Yeah.
I throw it up on the defroster, turn it on high, just prior to getting to the woods, and just change the temperature of what it standardly would be.
Oh, it's amazing.
Hoping that it just, encourages that buck to come on in.
Yeah, well, I'll have to certainly get out. What kind of temperatures do you hit out there during the peak of the rut, Dusty?
Yeah, usually we're between 30 and 50, about a 20-degree range. Maybe it'd be 37, 38 in the nighttime, and it can get up to 50 degrees during the daylight.
Huh. Well, I'll have to get you one of those little hotties. As I mentioned, doesn't even have to be freezing temperatures, because if you have something that's 40 degrees out there, then you have that scent that's around 90, 95. That scent is going to carry for a tremendous distance. I'll have to get one out to you.
Absolutely.
Dean, can you describe that a little bit more in detail? What the little hottie is all about?
Well, right now there's a patent pending on it, and what it is, it's about the size of a pack of cigarettes, something like that. And what we did is we had a mesh lining put on the outside with some material on the inner side of the packet. And a hand warmer heats up to about 110 degrees, and that slips down into the pocket on the exterior. So this allows the oxygen to get to it. It doesn't deteriorate if it gets a little bit wet or what have you. It's an all-natural based warming unit. And on the inside of that, there's like an aluminum foil type material that draws the heat. Aluminum transfers heat, or heat can transfer through aluminum very, very well, heat or cold. And it goes to a protected inside scent pad, which holds the scent product. And when that's set up, that hand warmer heats up, it draws through the aluminum to the scent pad and keeps your scent from freezing. And we've had it out there, it's, 15 or 20 degree temperatures, and you can see the darn thing steaming. It's kind of neat. It all depends on the quality of the hand warmer that you're using. Some of these hand warmers will heat for, 6 hours. And that's a long time to sit when it's that cold out.
Right.
But it's a great product. It also has a reflective tab on it, so that you can find the darn thing. How many things have you left in the woods when you're out hunting and you can't find it because it gets dark? It's a very effective unit. We've had deer come in and just not want to leave. It was funny last year, and I know it was a small buck. I don't think it was a big deer, but he was pretty convinced that there was a hot doe right there, because I kind of set my products up, my scent products. If you're going to put your products out, doe and heat, I try to put it in a fairly brushy area. I don't hang it in the middle of, some hardwoods right in the middle of everything. And if a buck walks in 50 yards and he looks and he sees nothing, he's probably going to turn around and go the other way. So I try to hide it just a little bit, and so he's going to at least look for it. And that seems to help, in a little brush pile or some hemlocks. Like if there's a doe laying down there, that's what I'm trying to mimic when I'm using little hottie.
Gotcha.
And the same thing could work on that's the same thing you could do. I just thought of it because we've done it quite a few times, is we'll make a mock scrape with buck urine, and 30 yards from that mock scrape, you set up a little hottie with doe and heat. And you can shoot the scrape and you can shoot the little hottie. You're simulating a couple deer there. You're simulating a buck that's probably hit that scrape with some buck or buck with tarsal. And again, you're setting up that, giving him what he's looking for, and that's his girlfriend. And you're basically manipulating what that deer is thinking. You're painting that picture for him to believe that there's a buck there. We've gone so far as to use it on both buck urine and doe urine. And we've had some giants come in, but they're pretty smart, and with a bow, if they don't come into range, it's you just can't get that shot.
Gotcha. Dean, if we could talk a little bit about the glands of the deer and your products, I assume incorporate some of those. We went through a whole range of all the glands that are on the whitetail with Dr. Carl Miller last week. And we got a great education about it, but I'm trying to figure out, we learned about it, but how do we apply it to our benefit, especially in the use of scents? What can we take to the woods and be confident that we're getting in some of your products with regards to the glands that the whitetail actually uses?
Well, I'm nowhere near as smart as the doctor is concerned, and he probably has greater insight as far as the glands, exactly what they do. But from my perspective, from a hunter's perspective, I think the biggest, most important glands to understand is the saliva gland, the saliva from the deer, that comes from the mouth, and when he hits that licking branch and he chews that he's identifying who he is. So knowing that is critical. The PreOrbital and the metatarsal glands, the forehead gland and the eye glands, again, those are identifying scents that the whitetail buck uses to identify himself to his competitors and other deer in that particular herd. The tarsal gland is probably one of the most interesting, as well as because the tarsal gland in the summertime it's kind of like a light burnt marshmallow color, if you will, a light tan. And as the tarsal gland itself doesn't really smell to any great degree, it's kind of like butterscotch in the summertime. It has kind of almost a sweet smell to it. And the gland's duty is to secrete a clear liquid that is designed to absorb smells. And as the buck, his testosterone rises, his urine becomes much more pungent. So that's when you're seeing, in photographs or on TV or on our game cameras and our scrapes, we're seeing these bucks urinating down their tarsal gland. The higher their testosterone goes, the closer they get to the peak of the rut, the more pungent that gets. And that tarsal gland absorbs those smells. And that's why, you shoot a good buck, a mature animal, you can, and he's down, you can smell him, for 50, 60 yards downwind. And understanding that particular gland, I think, is very important because that's how they're marking that scrape. And when, I say it a lot, you're inserting a virtual white-tailed deer in the deer woods to make another deer believe that there is or there was another deer there. And understanding what each one of these glands, I wish I would have heard this, caught that podcast. I'll have to get it from you at the end of the show.
Sure.
But understanding how those glands work has a lot to do with understanding deer behavior, deer movement, and the amount of bucks you have in that particular area. That tarsal gland does a lot for you, and as we use these doe urines, buck with tarsal and doe and heat, that is precisely why we start to change our deer lures. So as the rut progresses, as testosterone increases in the bucks and estrogen in the does, we're progressing along with it. This is the only technique that I've heard or I've practiced for so long that's out there where you're actually customizing your deer lures to the type or time of year that the rut is occurring. So this technique would work different for here as opposed to the southern rut. The southern rut's going to be a little bit more different, than it is, I think, in the north by as much as 2 weeks earlier. So you can actually customize the scent that you're using and understanding where that deer, through their behavior, how that deer is utilizing that gland to communicate, and you understanding it allows you to make the right decisions when you're applying your scent, and for that matter, when you're using the right call.
Okay. You just said a very interesting thing there, using the right call. Is there a correlation between using the doe and heat, the buck with tarsal? Are there certain calls that we should be using to mimic the virtual deer in conjunction with the use of these types of urines?
I think definitely. Your vocalizations are absolutely as critical as anything. It's kind of like when my wife says Dean, I know she wants something, but if she says Dean, I know that I did something. So and it didn't
sound that different, but there is a difference, and you know what it means.
If you were a deer, you would know the difference. And the same thing works with calls. A young buck will have that really a little bit of a higher grunt, whereas a mature buck will have a lower grunt. It's and a good example being if the neighbor's dog is barking really excited around 3:00, the kids are getting off the school bus, your dog is really excited. If your neighbor Phil comes home and the guy's running over your trash cans and your dog wants to eat them, that Phil's next door. So it's the same animal, different sound. So when you're utilizing your calls, you have your basic little hello grunt, I'm over here, your tending grunt, which is more of a pop type of a grunt, all the way from your low angry grunt to a snort wheeze, which is very, very aggressive, and everything in between there. Obviously, if you see a spike buck, if you snort wheeze it, although it's kind of fun to see what they do, they jump about 3 feet off the ground and head for the hills. And you could do the same thing with a buck with tarsal. On a young buck scrape, you might, blow him right out of the area. So your calls, your vocalizations are critical because that is, the other part of communication through scent and through vocalizations. The only scent missing from that is vision, which would be a decoy. Again, making that virtual whitetail or painting that picture for that deer to believe that there's another deer there or was there. So a good point being is a great, again, up in northern Vermont, that was on a Thanksgiving morning. I saw two does about 75 yards out. We had a little doe in heat out, and there was no way you could shoot through this anyway. There's just no way you could get a bullet through there, even if you wanted to. And about 20 minutes later, sure enough, I see some hardware on the same trail way out, and I took my grunt call, and all it took was one little pop. And this is about 75 yards away. That deer came so fast, probably in about 5 seconds, maybe less. If I wouldn't have shot him 10 yards in front of my tree stand, he'd probably have been in it with me. So two lessons learned there. Number one, you gave him exactly, he thought there was another buck in the area and he wasn't going to stand for it. And the other lesson learned is when you're using a call, they can identify exactly where the location of that sound came from. So you've got to be, pretty careful. I rarely ever call if there's a deer looking in my direction because they'll pick you right out pretty easily.
Right. Now, when you say you popped the call, what kind of call was it? Give me a description.
It's just a regular grunt call. It's more of a, just a short, almost like a little short pig snort type of grunt. If you could picture a deer, kind of trotting, and he's just kind of popping that grunt call. It's kind of like a grunt, 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 and that's kind of that tending grunt. Right. And a lot of times right after something like that, they'll let a really very low, long grunt out as their patience gets a little bit shorter trying to get that doe to stop.
Yep. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been there, and it's just like you see on TV, and you love it when things actually happen in the field like you see on TV. It's kind of cool. You're like, this is amazing. You're
interacting with the biggest thing about using calls and scents is that you're interacting with the white-tailed deer on their level. It's the opposite of tracking. Tracking or getting on that track. And my hat's off to these guys. They're some of the best hunters in New England, if not the entire United States. These trackers are incredible hunters, and I don't want to take anything away from it. When you're using calls and scent, the more you do it, just like tracking, the better you get at it. You have to get into a little bit more of understanding deer behavior as far as their communication between each other is. Because you're not chasing them. You're bringing them to you on purpose. And if you can do that, you're taking an animal that can hear an acorn hit the forest floor at 50 yards. He knows what it is. He can see you blink your eyes at 50 yards. He can smell you from 400 yards, run 0 to 35 in about, 3 seconds. And he can disappear and appear without being detected. So to bring that animal to you on purpose is the coolest darn thing. It's a great style of deer hunting, and what amazes me is all the deer lures and products that are out there. It's amazing. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bottles of this stuff, and not a whole lot of education on how to utilize it. And if you take it just to that next level, I think you're going to increase your odds of success. I think the best thing about Northwood's Common Sense is that it's not in the box stores. It's a little more of a pain to get it because it is fairly limited quantities, and the deer don't recognize it as being a danger. It's not everywhere. You walk out into the deer woods and there's 50 hunters and it smells like Blinky's deer pee. And I think it sets a precedent where the deer say, listen, this is a little bit out of control.
Well, you bring up a very good point. It was a question that kind of popped in my head a few minutes ago, is that your stuff is not all that easy to get. It's not on the shelves at every major store. You're not going to see it there.
And you won't see it there.
You won't see it there. But the stuff that is readily available, at some point, that whitetail, being as smart and as evolutionary as they are, they're going to figure out that the stuff that's on those shelves that is regularly plentiful, that is associated with hunters and danger, as opposed to your stuff, which is not easy to get, which has a different smell, by the way, and is probably not identified with danger as often because it's not as plentiful out there in the woods.
Yeah, I mean, it's not too difficult. And I will do the plug a little bit. I mean, it's 100% pure. It's undiluted. If you look at it, it doesn't look the same. It doesn't smell the same. It hasn't been filtered. It hasn't had additives to it. It has a 2-year shelf life, but everything is that we go through is we basically run out. What we don't sell, we take to the shows, the big sporting shows, or where we do our seminars and stuff like that, and we reduce the price, or we give it away to a lot of kids. It's the coolest darn thing, Jay and Dusty, is you see a little kid walking down, he's got that hat on, that baseball hat on, and you ask him if he's a hunter, he goes, I want to be, and you give him something, and whether it's a hunting magazine or whether it's a bottle of deer lure, and you say, now you're a hunter, you can go get them, but don't give any to your dad, or don't give any to your mom, whatever. And you've seen the looks. It's
sure.
So that fishing game, it is so neat to see.
Yep. Now, if we could, and I just want to revert back to our Common Deer Sense 101 class that we had on the podcast a year ago, could we run down just the different uses of your different bottles and when to use them? Because each one should be, as you described, should be used at a certain time and should not be used at a certain time. And I think it's important just to kind of recap that just so that everybody is hearing this one more time.
Sure. The 4 products that we carry are Doe, Buck with Tarsal, and Doe and Heat. And as I said, I've been doing this for well over the business 25 years, but doing scent products, working with them for 30. And what I have found, through education and mistakes, or learning from my mistakes, how's that? This is what we do. The Doe Urine is an unbelievable cover scent, first of all. Okay. Deer are very social animals. When you see one, usually you see 2. And if you see 2, usually you see 3. Doe Urine is probably the best cover scent that you could use on your rubber boots. And we keep our boots in boxes. We don't, with tops are open. I don't fill the Dodge 2500 with diesel fuel in my hunting boots. We take it very seriously, and that's why we use the best cover scent that we can, which is Doe Urine and or buck urine. Because when you're using that, when you smell like a doe or you smell like a buck, again, you're inserting that virtual deer into the deer woods, and you're kind of being part of Mother Nature. You're not putting a skunk in. You're not, rubber boots are going to smell like rubber boots. It takes a little while for you to get those boots to smell the way you want them and the way the deer want them, where they're not going to upset Mother Nature. The Doe Urine, again, is probably the best cover scent. Buck urine, the same thing, except you're targeting bucks in particular. It's like if you're rattling your deer horns, you're not catering to a doe and you're not catering to a spike buck. You're probably catering to a rack buck, and you're probably fairly sure there's one in the area, and that's what you're doing. So your buck urine, if you're trying to attract a buck, is going to be the best product to use. Now, you can use it on your rubber boots if you want. Sometimes I'll use Doe Urine most of the time I use Doe Urine as a cover on my rubber boots, but I will spray a little bit of buck off the side of the trail here and there. And again, you're talking a half of a little tiny pump of mist, which is, not a lot, virtually, just a small spray. So your buck urine is your curiosity scent. Now, even in August, we're opening up scrapes. And we've got pictures of several different buck in velvet, in the scrapes, chewing licking branches and peeing in them. So, there's proof in the pudding. And what's bringing those bucks in is that buck urine. You're kind of playing Mother Nature. You're kick-starting the clock. But the most effective, without bar none, for bow season, early bow season, is the buck urine. Now, as the season progresses, we're still using those same lures, but we start to doctor them up a little bit. And as I mentioned before, that's what makes the Power Pack so popular. That's a combination of all 4 products, and that comes with a free scent holster. But that's what makes that Power Pack so palatable, because you get 4 ounces of all 4 of these: Doe, Buck with Tarsal, and Doe and Heat, and that covers 90 days of hunting. And so you can progress. You can transfer using your Doe urine to a doe coming into estrus gradually, and by adding the Doe and Heat, and you can do the same thing with your buck urine and manipulate it so that buck's testosterone is increasing gradually. And it seems perfectly 100% natural in the deer woods. So as we get closer to the peak of the rut, what we'll do is by that time, by continuing to add to this product, eventually our mix is going to be probably, from 25% doe to 75% doe to 25% doe and heat, completely in reverse, where it's 75% doe and heat and 25% doe right all the way to the peak of the rut, which would be doe and heat, and the peak of the rut, which would be buck with Tarsal. So that's a brief. That was the 101 version of, and even if it wasn't Northwoods common sense, if you go out and you get a bottle, try to utilize that scent. Let it dictate, or you dictate when you use that based on what phase the rut is. Not only what phase, but how far along that phase is. You could be at the end of the pre-rut and you've got bucks fighting, as opposed to the beginning of the pre-rut. There's that 30-day, 45-day window. And then, of course, using Doe and Heat is a double-edged sword. Number one, a buck will breed anytime a doe will stand. But if you've got a high doe, low buck to doe ratio, I figure if I see 5 does, 6 does, I'm due to see a buck. So I'm not bent out of shape. If I see 5 or 6 does in the course of 2 or 3 hunts, something to that effect, I know I'm going to see a buck soon. It's just play the odds, and I'll look at that. And if you start introducing Doe and Heat too soon, the odds say you're going to see a doe first. She'll know it's not right. She blows, and when the girls are upset, everybody's upset.
Gotcha.
And again, introducing buck with Tarsal in an area that there's no rack buck, you might be, stubbing your toe there because you might kick out all, your meat deer if that's what you're going to shoot. And, there's all kinds of different looks at it. Here, again, we don't have a tremendous amount. We've got some good bucks on every ridge, but you really got to work for them. So,
gotcha. Awesome.
That's the basis as far as Deer Lures 101.
Yeah.
And of course, utilizing those lures appropriately in your scrapes. Another little a trick that I've learned is a lot of times, and I think you've seen it too, Jay and Dusty, is a buck will lick their tarsal glands while they're in their scrape, and then they'll go back to chewing that branch. So if you don't have, a PreOrbital gland and you don't have a metatarsal gland, a lot of times a little bit of a spray of buck urine on that branch just above is not going to hurt anything. I mean, I've seen them take dripper bags and and chew on them, or take a little hottie and feel it. So I mean, literally take it with them. Find it 100 yards away. So understanding how those. What's that?
That's funny. It's just kind of struck me as comical.
And you also get that scent off the ground a little bit. So you want to mimic the best that you can with the whitetails communicating. Gotcha. Using those 4 different products.
Gotcha. Dusty, what else you got for Dean before we let him go?
Dean, say you got a setup. Let's base it off of, your standard setup is, let's say you can visually see 400 or 500 yards in front of you to the sides. How many scrapes should somebody have, let's say, in a 200-yard span? Now
you're rifle hunting or archery?
Let's go with archery.
Okay, archery. Well, they've got to be within your range, and of course, I mean, my guess is that you're shooting out where we're at here. We're pretty limited as far as our range is concerned because it's hard not to find a tree to run into. It's so close.
That's true. I'll verify that, Dean.
Yeah. So my guess is, again, I think I would probably, in that huge span, if you have them too far away from you, you might end up, like I said, stubbing your toe because he may go to one that's 80 yards away. If it was rifle season, I'd say all over it. Yeah, I'd put 3 or 4. You could set them right up. Whether you use any scent in them or not, even if you open up, for the guys that aren't using the scent, if you open up a scrape, use a stick, be scent proof as you can, make sure that licking branch is there. A lot of times these deer will take it right over. But back to your question, I think as far as archery, less might be better. Only because you've got to get him to you, get him into range. Now, if you're shooting out to 60 yards, I don't know what you're shooting at. But then again, you might want a couple of them, one on either way, which is going to increase your odds because you're going to have that blowing out into different areas. It might double your odds. But certainly I wouldn't put him out of your shooting range, because then he could come into that scrape. He might even lay down in some brush right there, and it gets dark on you, and you can't get a whack at him.
All right, that's great. It's just something that the average archery hunter can utilize. That keep your scrapes close, keep them within range, and set them up right, and hope for a great success.
Absolutely, and if you can remember to try, the biggest mistake that I made the most consecutive amount of times is trying to get that scent upwind from your stand. So that deer's got to come across in front of you to get to it. You still can shoot it out. Let's just say a right-handed shooter. You can still shoot it 30 yards out to your left if that wind is blowing to your right. And if he comes in and he stops at 50 yards from that scrape, you've got him right in front of you. And it just took so many times. If you put that scent right in front of you, you're setting yourself up for failure because a lot of times, just like a big old tom, they'll come in a certain ways and they'll just wait. And it just won't come in that extra, 15, 20 yards that you really need. So that's how I'd set it up, Dusty.
Awesome. Dean, if people want to get a hold of your products, where can they find Northwoods Common Sense?
They can find us at www.team-northwoods.com. And there's a brief seminar on there that we kind of, it doesn't go into as much detail when we're at the shows, but it really breaks down the 3 phases of the rut, and explains how to utilize the deer lures independently and how to use them collectively, when to use them, when not to use them. And I'm really proud to say that we get some great responses. We get a lot of great pictures. Even I checked my computer in northern Vermont. I got like 3 people that send me a thank you with pictures of their bucks, and that's what makes it all worth it for us. That's what makes it worth it for us.
Awesome. Dean, I'm a huge believer in your product. I don't buy the other stuff. I only buy your stuff, and I like it because it's kind of, it's not as known as much as we're talking about it because you're such a knowledgeable individual when it comes to this stuff and how to apply it. But it's kind of my secret weapon, and I've said that time and time again. I've said it over and over, but it really is. It helps me get so close to deer when others can't that it's like, I want to share it, but I don't want to share it. So it's kind of one of those things.
Well, I got hung up on that. When we first started the business and we started shooting deer, and I was amazed by the response. And people are saying, "Well, why are you telling people about this and how are you doing this and this?" And it was a decision I made a long time ago that I'd rather have fun with it and enjoy it. I'm still shooting deer. I'm very happy with it, but it helps a lot of people. It educates them. They have fun with it, and it's fantastic. I've had, by the way, an order from Missouri, Michigan, Virginia, and Minnesota. So all those folks that are listening to the Big Buck Registries, they're sending their kudos my way, which is and I'm hoping to get pictures back from these guys, and I want to thank you guys for having me on.
Well, we're psyched to have you. Absolutely. Dusty and I couldn't thank you enough, Dean, coming on and filling our heads with some just more intense information about how to use the scents correctly and when to use it. It is kind of a complex strategy, and if you didn't know any better, you wouldn't think there was a certain time to use what, when, and why. But this certainly answered a lot of those questions for us and for everybody else that's listening behind us. So we thank you again for joining us on the Big Buck Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, and I look forward to running into you guys in the near future here.
Just another amazing course from Dean Vanier.
Absolutely. There's always something from Dean to the hunter that's going to work.
Yep.
If you take your time, listen to this podcast, use Dean's advice, and apply it to the woods, watch out.
Yep. Listen to this show, episode 71, and listen to episode 18, and you'll get the full spectrum of how to use each one and when, and what strategies to apply when, where, how.
Absolutely.
Just like taking a course. He does teach courses, actually. That's the funny thing, is he'll go out and teach whole courses on how to use this stuff, and not just the stuff he's selling, but everybody's brand, because he knows, he studies this stuff. You talk to the guy, you can tell that he thinks about this all the time, which is kind of strange that you think about dopey all the time, but that's what he's doing, and we're just thrilled to get Dean back on the show.
Absolutely. And we hope that it takes your hunt to the next level.
Absolutely. You've had success over this stuff using Dean's techniques. I have had success with using Dean's products, getting very close, shooting a couple of nice deer, and I've had success getting close to deer to the point where I was surrounded by about 7 does, and I was like hanging out in the herd with them. They didn't even care.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
It is unbelievable. I wish I had brought my video camera that day. I didn't, but it was one of the most enlightening experiences I think I've ever had. To think that they weren't spooked just blew me away. And so I thank Dean for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things where I'm going to testify that I was a little skeptical about using urine in the woods. I never, prior to Dean, I tried a few things, but, I had confidence in the way Dean talked about his product that I took it out and I used it. And, it's one of them things where I shot my buck the next day after I put the urine out last year. That's proofs in the pudding.
Yep. And go ahead. Sorry. Keep going.
He come right in and checked the scrape that I made a mock scrape the next morning. He was coming in to check it.
That's awesome, man. I've had some success with other products, but I've never had as much success as I have until I started using Dean. So, man, I'm glad we connected with Dean. Awesome stuff.
Absolutely. And Dean, thanks for joining us. And
thank you.
Always a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for letting us pick your brain and give a little more insight into dopey. It's always a fun, exciting course and topic to discuss. So, Dusty, what do we have this week for the Chubby Tines tip of the week?
Yeah, I'm going out there and tell you that my tip is to try different things. Go outside the box and research new and different things to apply in the woods. Even if it's something that you heard right here on the Big Buck podcast, go use it. Try different things. Failure is a map to success. And I want you to try different things in the whitetail woods, and don't go to the extreme where it's going to mess you up. But there is little things such as, Doe urines, mock scrapes. If you've never done it, you don't know until you try.
Exactly. That is so true. So, well, Dusty, how can we reach you over at Chubby Tines Outdoors offline?
Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Shoot me a message. Like the page. Check it out. It's rocking right now because the deer season's in, and we are seeing a lot of bucks hit the ground.
A lot of bucks going down right now. And did you know that we were the #1 outdoor podcast? Actually, not the #1 outdoor podcast. We were the #4 outdoor podcast for a while. We were the #1 hunting podcast for a while. And then we've been bouncing back and forth between the wild game hunting podcast, the Wired to Hunt podcast, Mark Kenyon and Corby Taylor. And we've just kind of been shifting back and forth.
That's pretty cool. We're trying hard to stay in the top rankings. And, we wouldn't be able to do it without the listeners, with all the downloads and all your reviews there at iTunes. We appreciate all that.
Yep. And it's kind of cool because You can tell it's deer season because all the hunting podcasts are like jumping way up to the top in the outdoor category.
It's hunting season?
'Tis the season, Dusty.
I'm there every day, brother.
Yep, me too. Well, that's cool. Well, let me, as it's a mouthful, but let me run down all the places where you can find us at the Big Buck Registry and our podcast. First and foremost, I'd like to invite you to come to iTunes and check us out there and listen to all 71 episodes that we have. From the beginning to where we are today, it's www.bigbuckregistry.com/iTunes. You can also visit us at bigbuckregistry.com if you'd like to submit a photo to Facebook on our Wall of Fame. And we're hitting I think we're getting close to about 130,000 followers. So if you shoot a nice buck and you want some recognition for it, and you kind of want to tell the world about it and be famous for a day, there's no better place than the Big Buck Registry to come and post your photo for the day. And you'll get many, many likes, I guarantee it. So best place to do that is to go to www.bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/BigBuckRegistry, twitter.com/BigBuckRegistry, youtube.com/BigBuckRegistry. And if you would like to do a share for share, it's bigbuckregistry.com/S4S. And please give us a call at 724-613-2825. Give us some feedback about this show. And again, iTunes, www.bigbuckregistry.com/iTunes. Go there, give us a review, 5-star hopefully, and subscribe. It's totally free to subscribe, and you'll get every single episode notification as it comes out every week. I think that's it.
Big buck everywhere.
A big buck. Nice.
Shoo, that's a lot.
It is a lot to remember.
But you're on it.
Fortunately, we've been doing this for almost 2 years now, so it's kind of sunk in.
Absolutely, and it's getting better every week.
It is. We love this stuff. Love all our listeners. Thank you for tuning in, and come back next week and check us out again.
Absolutely. We appreciate you tuning in with us.
Absolutely. So I'm Jay Scott.
And I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Can't wait.